It's ExmouthAiR, 106.4 FM, and of course around the world on the internet. And we certainly are going around the world. We're going to speak to Fay Knowles, a book writer who's got East Devon connections, but she's talking to me live from Nassau in the Bahamas. Good morning to you, Fay.
Good morning, Howard. How are you?
Well, I'm good. I trust you are. What, some on earth now? What is it, about 5:30 in the morning there?
Yeah, it's 25 after 6, but I was up at 5:30 to make sure that I was up in time.
Well, as long as you're wide awake, or are you?
Well, yeah, I've had a cup of tea, so I'm all right.
Well, that's it. The fact that you're all those miles away and a great cup of tea pokes you up in the morning, doesn't it?
That's right, about 5,000 miles away.
Wow. And I tell you what, it's a better line than it is from here to Budleigh Salterton sometimes.
That's great. And I'd like to say hello to all your listeners, too.
Well, I'm sure that's reciprocated. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a very interesting life you've had. Can we go all the way back and find out when you got interested in writing and what sort of age you were?
Okay, I started writing when I was about 9. I was actually reading a poem that inspired me, and from then I just didn't stop writing. I just started writing away like crazy, and ever since then I've written. And it was all because of a poem I read when I was 9 years old. And
it went from there, really, and you haven't looked back, have you, at all?
No, not at all. Just kept going.
So, obviously, no real influences there. Just the fact that when you were young, you decided that you wanted to get into writing. And my goodness me, look at you now! What's happened to you from all those early days?
Yeah.
It's quite amazing what you've achieved over the years, I have to say. Because
thank you.
You've done many things. Because you've been a newspaper reporter as well, haven't you?
Yes, that's right. When we lived in Exeter, or I lived in Exeter. When I was 16, and my mother wanted me to go to college and train to be a secretary, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a newspaper, and I wanted to train from the bottom up. And there weren't any opportunities in Exeter at the time for girls. I tried to get into the Express and Echo, but they would only take boys. And so I had to go and train as a secretary against my will. I didn't want to do it. But my mother said, well, you could always use your shorthand and typing for your writing later on. And mothers are always right, and she was right. And I enjoyed my course, and I became a good secretary, and it's always stood me in good stead all these years. But my first job was as secretary for St. Loy's College, for the welfare officer at St. Loy's College. And I worked there for a year. It was a really nice job. I enjoyed it very much. And then suddenly an opportunity came up. 2 Fleet Street reporters came down from London and started a news agency in Exeter. It was called the Exeter News and Photographic Service on Sidwell Street. And so I applied for that and I got it. They were advertising for a Girl Friday come trainee reporter, so I had to run around and make coffee for them as well. But they did give me a very good training, and they sent me to day release classes at Exeter College, along with all the boys that I couldn't work with at the Express and Echo. And it was very, very tough training. They were very hard on me. It was all very hardcore, but it was excellent training.
So, of course, they threw you in the deep end, really, didn't they?
Oh, they did, yes, very much so. I was sent out on a murder case, and then I had very mundane jobs as well. I remember being sent to cover a rugby match, and I didn't know anything about rugby as well. So I enlisted one of my friends, Mike Vickery. I don't know if anyone will remember Mike Vickery. He and Pam had a sports shop on Queen Street. And he was a great guy. They both were, and I've lost touch with them, unfortunately. So if anyone knows them, please ask them to get in touch with me, because my husband and I would love to hear from them again. Mike was a real character. He always had us in stitches. He was really funny. But they used to have the El Zamba coffee shop in Exeter. I don't know if anyone remembers that, off 4th Street. That was a great coffee shop. But anyway, I enlisted his help, and he guided me through the report for the rugby match. He sat there and he told me what they were doing, and I was able to write up the story. But my favorite stories at the time were like the national papers would want a story about Christmas, and they would ask us to provide one. So I was given the job of finding needy people who needed turkeys at Christmas. So I did that. I found needy people and wrote stories about them. So that's the sort of story I like to do. I really didn't like those hardcore stories. I remember getting the final straw actually was because I was sent out on an assignment. A young girl had been knocked off her bicycle, and I was sent along to the house to cover the story. And my bosses said, "Oh, find out if she's engaged," and all this sort of thing. So when I got to the door, the father came to the door, and I said, "I'm terribly sorry to hear that your daughter had an accident." And he said, "Oh, she's just died." Well, you know, I was only 18, you know, very young, and I was quite taken aback by it. And I said, "Oh, well, I won't bother you at all." And he said, "No, come in and sit down." And he sat down with me, and he told me all about his daughter, and she was engaged. It was very sad. And I just left, you know. I didn't want to do a story like that. You know, it was too sad. Went back to the office, and my bosses said, "Well, how did you get on?" And I said, "Oh, it was terrible. She died." And yeah, oh gosh, great story. You know, was she engaged? Yes, very sad. She was engaged. And they said, "Well, did you get any photographs?" Back in those days, reporters used to take photographs off people's mantelpieces and use them for the stories. And I said, no, of course I didn't. And they said, "Well, you go right back and you get some photographs off the mantelpiece." And I refused to do it. I just wouldn't do it. And one of them went back, and he was thrown out on his heels by the brothers. But that kind of put me off becoming a reporter. But I kept on writing, and ever since I have, and that stood me in very good stead. Most of my publishing successes until I started writing books were feature stories in magazines and newspapers. And I also got sent on a couple of nice assignments. One was in the Bahamas. One was for Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. And my husband and I were sent on a cruise for me to do an article about Royal Caribbean. And that was nice. You know, of course, I ran around interviewing people and taking photographs for my husband to lay out by the pool and have a nice time.
Do you know what, Fay? I'm going to try that. I'm going to contact Caribbean Cruises and say, Royal Caribbean, say, "I want to do a story on your cruise ship."
Right. You might get it. You might get it too. Of course, this is not the time because the cruise lines aren't running. But
no, they're not. But when all this business is over, you never know, do you? You've given me an idea now, Fay. I tell you, wonderful.
I think they're starting in August. I think they're starting up again the cruise ships in August.
Fingers crossed. Now, you mentioned about newspapers, which is connected with Exeter, but also, am I right in thinking you were connected with the Exeter Writers Club as well?
Yes, it was called the Exeter and District Writers Club back then. It's now Exeter Writers. And I was very fortunate when my family and I were living in Exeter from 1983 to 1987. And my husband had St. David's General Stores, and we lived over in Exmouth at the time. And I used to walk up the hill every third Saturday, I think it was, to the Exeter and District Writers Club meeting. And that was wonderful. I really got so much out of that. There were so many published writers there, and they were so encouraging. And I actually had the good fortune to meet the late famous author Mary Higgins Clark. She came along to talk to the group, and she was very inspiring. I think she was staying with an American friend who I think lived at Lympston at the time. I can't remember her name. And she inspired all of us so much. We all went rushing back home to right away. But there was one writer there that actually, I can't remember her name now, but everyone was trying to write Mills and Boon books as well, because we all knew that they were very well paid for, you know. But it wasn't the kind of genre that I was interested in, but I did buy some material about how to write them and studied up on it, but I didn't get very far with that. But this writer, this member, she actually was accepted by Mills and Boon, and she went up to London to meet the editors, and we were all so thrilled about it.
So was it at that point then, being connected with the Exeter Writers Club, that sort of instilled something into you to say, I'm going to write some books as well?
Well, not books at the time. I was really into short stories. In fact, while I was there, one of the things we did was, at the beginning of the meetings, people would pass on any marketing information they had, and of course we always declared our successes as well, and everyone would clap. But one of the markets that came up was a tire magazine, of all things, and they were looking for short stories. So I sent off a short story about a dentist who met a sticky end, and believe it or not, it was accepted. But very sadly, I never saw the story in print, and I had to sign something to receive my £18. I think it was £18 I got paid for it. And so I never saw it, and it was like a child, and I was thinking it was like it was floating around the world somewhere, and that I would never see again.
And of course, the thing is about, you've obviously been around East Devon. What is it about East Devon that produced so many wonderful writers? And of course, we're talking about a Booker Prize winner as well, namely Hilary Mantel from Budleigh Salterton. So what is it about Devon that produces good writers, and a lot of them?
You know, that's an interesting question, Howard. I don't know, maybe it's just the scenery, the sea, it's all the weather. You know, everything is so inspiring. The summers can be so beautiful. The winters are lovely. I mean, we spent many lovely Sundays walking along Exmouth seafront in the freezing cold, you know, and battling against the rain, and even having an ice cream while it was cold. I think that's got a lot to do with it. Also, people are very nice down there in Devon. Everyone's very warm and friendly.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, yeah.
and tell me, because am I right in thinking that your first book was about Exmouth?
Well, it was set, my first book, Dangerous Devotion, which was originally Love at Sunset, was set in the Bahamas in Scotland. And the main characters, Violet and Gordon, actually took a trip down to Devon because Violet had a connection with Devon. Gordon is Scottish. And they went down to do some business in Exeter. And they went and stayed over at night in Exmouth and did all the things that I used to do when I lived there. You know, had ice cream, visited the shopping precinct there. Gordon bought Violet some flowers. They were very much in love. Gordon and Violet lived in the Bahamas. He was Scottish, and she came from a long line of Bahamians, way back, colonial Bahamians. And they fell in love for the second time around, but their family were dead against their relationship. And so they actually ran away, and the family didn't know where they were. And and Violet also had a dangerous situation in Nassau as well that they had to get away from. It's a romantic suspense, and it's full of intrigue and romance and scandal as well, family drama, and that's what that's about.
So take us from the point where you were in Britain, and then the next minute you were in the beautiful Bahamas. Talk to me about how that came about.
Okay, well, I guess I've got to backtrack a bit. I was born in Scotland. My mother was Scottish and my father Australian. He was in the Royal Australian Air Force and my mother was a WAF. And after the war, my mother and I went out to Australia on a bride ship. We were out there for a couple of years, and then my father moved us back to Scotland, then down to Stourbridge, then down to Buckingham, then down to Bideford, and from there on to Exeter. Well, I was working in Exeter after training to be a secretary and also training to be a reporter, but I really wanted to travel the world. That was my ambition. I had an aunt, a Swedish aunt, Adelaide Johansson, who was very adventurous, and I often think that I took after her. I really wanted to travel, and so I was going to go to New Zealand with a friend, but then she started going steady with her boyfriend, and so my mother said, "Oh, you can't go to New Zealand on your own." In those days, you had to be 21, and you had to get your mother's or your parents' permission to travel, to go anywhere. So she said, the only place you can go is to Canada. That's where her sister and family lived. So I thought, okay, Canada, and I had to save up some money to go there. And so what I did was I was working as a secretary to the manager of District Bank at the time, and I took a job in a bar at night, 6 nights a week. So I worked in the bank in the daytime and I worked in a bar at night. It was the Sherry Bar, I think it was called Bernie's Inns. It was near Boots on High Street, just off High Street.
Yes, and they were called Bernie Inns in those days. I don't think any longer now, but yeah, they were quite famous all around the country, of course. That's
right, they were, yes. I had this job there. My mother was head receptionist in the Royal Clarence at that time, and so what I did was, in order to save the money to emigrate to Canada, I practically starved myself. I would eat porridge for breakfast, and then I would go to Exeter bus station and have chips and peas for lunch, And then after my job in the bank, I would go to the Royal Clarence, and my mother would rustle up some sandwiches for me, little dainty sandwiches and cakes, and I'd gobble those up. And then I would go to my night job in the bar, and then what would happen was very often someone would offer me a drink. So I would sit on the same drink all night. So every time somebody wanted to buy me a drink, I would just pocket the money. So that was extra money towards my trip. And then on Sundays, my maternal grandmother, was living in Dawlish at the time. And so what I would do on Sundays, I would catch the bus down to Dawlish, and she would serve me a great big meal, and that's when I would have a proper meal. Anyway, I saved up all my money to go to Canada. It only took me a few months. And I used to sit in the district bank and look out the window and just imagine myself going off on a ship with all the weight going out the back, out the stern. And that was my dream at the time. Anyway, so I saved enough money, went down 4th Street to a camping shop and bought a cabin trunk and went off to Canada. So when I got to Canada, it was a wonderful trip on the ship, by the way. That's really fabulous. It took about 8 days. And then we went down to St. Lawrence when we got to Canada. And the two ships had collided further down, so we had to stop at Quebec. And they let us off, and we all just got off the ship and went into Quebec, and people gave us rides around and to see all the sights. And then we went on down to St. Lawrence and landed at Montreal, and my uncle flew up from Toronto to meet me and then flew me down to Toronto. It's the first time I'd flown in a jet. It was very exciting. And I got a job in Toronto with the Canadian Food Journal as an editorial assistant and also the gift buyer. That was another magazine I worked for. But I worked there for a few months, and I loved Toronto. It was great. I had a great time. But then the winter was coming, and I'd heard the winters were very harsh. So I thought, well, I must go somewhere tropical, which is where I really wanted to go in the beginning. And my uncle's secretary said, well, what about the Bahamas? She'd been to Freeport, Grand Bahama. And I said, where's the Bahamas? My geography wasn't very good, even though I was going around the world. And so I looked at the map, and there it was, those little tiny pinpricks down the bottom of the map. And so I found the cheapest way to get to the Bahamas was to catch a Greyhound coach down across the States from Toronto down to Miami, and that took me about 4 days, and then to fly from Miami into Nassau. And in those days, they let me into the States because I had a ticket out to Nassau, and they let me into Nassau because I had a ticket back to the States. So when I got to Nassau, I didn't have an awful lot of money. I was having my money grandly wired to me, which I thought that's the way to go. When you're a world traveler, you have your money wired to you, and it hadn't arrived yet. And I had 3 nights hotel accommodation paid for, and not very much money, and no job. Anyway, I was very fortunate. I managed to find a job on the Monday. I arrived on the Monday. I got the job on the Tuesday working for a temp agency there, and I got my work permit on the Wednesday. And that's how I got to the Bahamas.
I mean,
but I was only... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it all sounds rather wonderful, but I mean, give us an idea of what's the... I know it's early today, but later on, what's the maximum temperature going to be in the Bahamas, particularly Nassau today?
Well, right now, it's in the 70s at night and the 80s in the daytime. And then when we get into the summer, it'll be in the 80s at night and the 90s in the daytime. And then in the winter, it can go down, it's in the 60s in the winter at night and then the 70s in the daytime. But it can get quite chilly sometimes at night in the winter time. And, of course, it's very hot in the summer, and it gets humid in the summer. So that's why we feel the heat more in the summertime. You
obviously love the Bahamas very much, but you must have an equally love for East Devon and Exeter and the surrounding area.
Oh, gosh, it makes me feel nostalgic just speaking to you and remembering those lovely days that we lived there. We lived in that area for many years, and I lived there from, like I said, went down there to Devon and Bideford, first of all, when I was 12, and then to Exeter at 16. And my mother lived in Topsham for 37 years, so we have a very strong connection with Topsham. And, of course, whenever we were living in the Bahamas, I would go out there every year with our sons, and we, went all around the area, down to Exmouth, Sidmouth, Budley, and then my uncle and aunt, my mother's brother and his wife, they lived in Dorset, so we used to take the bus from Exeter all along the Jurassic Coast to Poole, that area.
That is a lovely bus journey, I tell you.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
It is very much so. Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And as far as East Devon goes and the area, I mean, did you try and get back on the odd occasion back to your sort of roots, if you like? And if so, is that something that you always look forward to doing?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't been able to make any trips back. We made one trip back since my mother passed away, and we stayed with a friend in Exeter, and very sadly she died. I have a lovely sister who lives up north. She's Welsh, and she and her family live up north. So whenever we get over there, of course we try to get up there, but she comes over here more now, so there's not quite the pull, and it's so expensive, to get over there these days. But when we can afford it, definitely we'll come back again, because we do miss it, and we love that area, and makes me, like I said, it makes me feel very nostalgic speaking to you about it.
Well, that's fine. Just one point, you mentioned the Royal Clarence Hotel in Exeter, and of course, as you probably know, it was a very, very sad a few years ago when, of course, we had that awful fire there, and it burned down, and now it's been demolished.
Yes. Oh, has it? I didn't know that. I thought they were going to try and rebuild it. Oh, that's so sad.
It's very, very sad, isn't it? For everybody who knew and frequented the Royal Clarence, it is a sad time.
Yes.
Right, let's talk about your books, if we may, because you're up to what? Am I right in thinking you're up to about 6 now? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. My first book was a book of short stories. What happened was I met this very successful Bahamian author, Tanya R. Taylor, and at the time I was sending my novel off to traditional publishers and agents, and I was going the traditional route. And what I planned on doing was I was going to keep submitting this book to up to 100 publishers and agents, and if I wasn't successful by the time I got to 100, then I would consider self-publishing. But self-publishing is not cheap, it's quite expensive to do it right. And so one day I met this very, like I say, very successful author. She's become a best-selling author, actually, Tanya R. Taylor, and she encouraged me to turn my short stories into a collection of short stories. And so I did that, and that was published December 2015. That was my first published book. And that went so well that I decided to follow the same route with Love at Sunset, which eventually became Dangerous Devotion, which is my first book in my Buchanan Mystery Romance series. It's a romantic suspense. And after that, I have the next book after that was The Scottish Connection, and that's a mini-memoir about when my mother and I took our sons back to Scotland to revisit our roots. So after that one was let me see now, the first one was Sunbeams from the Heart, then Love at Sunset. Then after that was I'm just trying to think what the second one
You see,
was.
you've done so many, Fay.
I know.
You've lost touch with the ones that you've
done.
I
know, I'm losing track. Okay, so the first one was Sunbeams, then Love at Sunset, which became Dangerous Devotion, then The Scottish Connection. Now, after that, I wrote a Writer's Guide, How to Be the Best Writer Ever. That was the next one. And then the one after that was Moonbeams from the Soul, which is a collection of 14 short stories. But they're not romantic, they're provocative. That's the only way I can describe them. And then, as Dangerous Devotion had become book 1 in my Buchanan Mystery Romance series, I then wrote Deadly Defeat in Paradise, which is a mystery romance, so it's a romantic suspense, and that was published just in March. And that's not just a romantic suspense, that's also a whodunit. I'm getting more into whodunits now.
After your first book, Fay, did you sort of sit down and think, am I really, did you think that's enough now, I've done what I wanted to do, I've written a book, or did that first book will you to go on to the second and third and so on?
Well, that's a good question. There was a point at which I thought, okay, I've written a novel, and I was very happy with it. It went well. I wrote it like crazy. I wrote it actually only in about 2 months. Then it took me another 2 months to edit. But this friend of mine, Tanya R. Taylor, she encouraged me. You know, she said, you should make that into a series. And I said, well, maybe I should. And that's how the next one came out, Deadly Deceit in Paradise. And, of course, I'm working on my third one now. That's the third romantic suspense. But, yes, there was a time when I thought, you know, I've been quite successful, I've got these books published, do I really need to keep writing? But, you see, I love writing. This is the whole thing. I just love it so much.
And does it take up much of your day? You get up, and also, do you find that your best ideas either you get very early in the morning or late at night? Does it work like that?
No, it doesn't. The ideas can come to me any time. The idea for Dangerous Devotion, my husband and I, he's a musician. He plays guitar and sings. And we were in a bar restaurant one night, and he was jamming with another musician. And somebody told me about this elderly couple who were up at the bar and said that they were in love for the second time around, but their children were dead against it. They didn't want them to have this relationship. They didn't want them to get married. And so that gave me the idea for Dangerous Devotion. And so that started me off on that track. So really, the ideas can come any time, and I scribble them down whenever I get an idea, any kind of idea. This is what you have to do. No matter if it sounds stupid, you just write it down. And you can keep a file full of ideas, or you could put it on your computer, and then when you're ready to write something, you just go through your ideas file, and you can write a short story, or you can write a book.
So, Fay, the thing is, you've written so many now. Is there more in the pipeline then?
Oh, yes. I'm working on my third in the Buchanan Mystery Romance series, and then I've also started another book of, another collection of romantic short stories as well.
Wow. So you're a busy lady.
Well, also, I'm the family secretary, so I do any secretarial work for the family. We have 2 sons, 2 adult sons, Gavin and Rory, and whenever they want any work done, or my husband Erskine wants any secretarial work done, I do that. And then also Gavin has a pool business called Saline Pools, so I help him with that. I answer phone calls, and I help him with his schedules, his pool schedules. So I'm quite busy, so I cram the writing in here and there as I can. Often I'm writing at night when we're watching a good movie. I write in the commercials. I jump off up on my computer and scribble away, or not scribble away, but type away on my computer. By the days I used to scribble away, that's how it used to be at one time. Everything was longhand. I wrote my first book when I was 11, by the way, and that was an adventure book.
Which is very young to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I scribbled that in an old ledger book of my father's. He and my mother had a jewellery shop in Buckingham. He was a watchmaker jeweller, and I scribbled it away. But unfortunately, it got lost in one of my travels. My husband is from Long Island. He comes from a long line of Bahamians going way back to the 1700s. Long Island is an island way down, almost in the southern Bahamas, and we were living there at the time, and I left some things in boxes there, and I think some insects might have got at the boxes when we went back to Nassau, and I think they might have eaten my book.
Oh.
So that was my book that I wrote when I was 11.
Now, one thing we haven't touched on yet, and you're going to tell me whether it's in the pipeline there again, turning your books, any of them, into either TV features or films, for example.
Well, I would just love that. And Erskine is always telling me, gosh, that should be a movie, you know. And I would love it. So anybody that is in the movie industry, please contact me. That would be wonderful.
Well, there you are.
Not that easy. Not that easy to get.
No, I'm sure not.
Yeah.
Right. So if anybody... So your current book is titled what?
Oh, the book that I'm working on now, I can't divulge that, unfortunately.
Can you not tell us anything about it at all, then, Fay, if I press you, or not?
Oh, well, I have a name for it. I have a title.
Right.
But don't really want to give it away now.
No, that's fine, and I respect what you say.
It has the word death in it. I'll give you that. And
right.
Has lots of, and it has lots of romance in it. And it also has a lot of family drama and scandal, which all my books have.
My. I mentioned about accomplished writers, and you're no exception because you've got am I right that you've got diplomas, haven't you?
Yes, I did some correspondence courses in the days when the material had to go back and forward by the mail, by the post. And so I have a diploma in novel writing from Writer's Digest in the US, and also from a short story course diploma from ICS College in London. So I did that by correspondence. And I was also working as a secretary at the time, so it took me a while to get those courses finished. But I eventually got them done.
And what does writing do for Fay Knowles then?
Oh, writing is my passion. I just love it. It takes me away into another world. It's wonderful. I really enjoy it. And yes, but it's not the main thing in my life. I must always put God first, then my family, and then the books come afterwards.
If there's anybody listening who is interested in starting a career maybe in writing of some shape or form, what advice would you give them, Fay?
Well, you could buy my book, How to Be the Best Writer Ever. That would be...
Oh, I like that, Fay. It's very good. Very good there.
And just go to Amazon and type my name in the search box there. Fay Knowles, no E on the end of Fay, and all my books will come up. But really the main thing is just to keep writing. Every day write something, no matter what it is. If it's just, if you think it's rubbish, don't worry about it. I've written a lot of rubbish. Sometimes I've stayed up well into the night writing, and then in the morning when I get up and I've looked at it and I've thought, oh, that's rubbish. So just keep writing, keep trying, and also study your craft. That's very, very important. My bookshelves are full of books on writing, and I still refer to them sometimes, even though it's, you can search online. But sometimes I go to those books on my shelves, and I've studied my craft all my life, and I still continue to study it. Never stop studying, and keep writing, because if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Very briefly, Kay, can I just ask you, we obviously, as a lot of countries are in lockdown at the moment, just very briefly, just tell us how the coronavirus is affecting your neck of the woods, i.e. Nassau in the Bahamas then.
Yeah, first of all, it's Fay, not Kay. But that's all right. A lot of people
Sorry, I thought I said that, but my apologies.
That's all right, no problem. But anyway, yes, well, we're in lockdown this weekend. Now, lockdown in the Bahamas means that nobody can go out anywhere except essential workers, like utility people and the medical profession. So we really are in lockdown. We cannot leave our premises at all, or we'll be charged, and hauled before the courts. So that's from Friday night at 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock Monday morning. Now, through the week, we can go out and about, but they prefer you just one person per family to go shopping. And you only must go out if you're going to go to a food store, or you have to go to the bank or the pharmacy. But they've also started releasing some businesses slowly. We're slowly starting to go into the recovery mode. We've got a population in the Bahamas of about 400,000 people. Most of those people are in Nassau, the capital. We have no coronavirus in most of the family islands, which used to be called out islands. No coronavirus at all there. And we have some in Bimini, and we had some in Grand Bahama, and then there was just one more, but very few. Apart from that, New Providence, where Nassau is located, the rest of the Bahamas has no coronavirus. So the government is talking about probably allowing those family islands to start going back to normal before we do in the city. We have about 92 confirmed cases now in the Bahamas, and most of those are in New Providence, and sadly 11 deaths, but we haven't seen any increase in deaths for some time. And so gradually the businesses are starting, some businesses are starting to operate. Our son Gavin is permitted to operate his pool business, because if pools are not kept sanitized, they can spread waterborne diseases. So he's fortunate in that case. Our other son is just working from home, He does software development. And then the rest of the businesses, a lot of them are doing curbside and delivery. Then some of the hardwares are open 2 days a week. And pharmacies are open every day, but only till, I think it's 1 o'clock. So we're gradually, hopefully, going into the recovery mode.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll soon be out of it, which I hope you will be in the UK too.
Fingers crossed, Fay. And listen, thank you so much for your chat this morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope the listeners have too. And stay safe, won't you?
Yes, you stay safe too, and thank you very much for having me on your show, and
you're more than welcome,
everyone.
You are more than welcome. Thank you very much indeed, all the way from Nassau in the Bahamas. You take care.
Okay.
And regards to the other half too.
Thank you, will do. Thanks so much, Howard.
You're very, very welcome. There we are, ladies and gentlemen, book writer who's had East Devon connections, all the way talking from Nassau in the Bahamas. We'll be talking to the book writer, Fay Knowles.